Today, we're diving into one of the most significant developments in the ongoing conflict: Ukraine severing Russia's lifeline to Crimea. This event is being described as a major turning point, not just militarily, but strategically, politically, and symbolically. In this video script, we'll break down exactly what happened, why it matters, what it means for the future of the war, and how this moment is reshaping the trajectory of the region. The paragraphs will remain short, the tone will remain clear and conversational, and the story will unfold in a way that keeps your viewers fully engaged. For months, analysts had been speculating about Ukraine's next big move. Many believed Ukraine would continue focusing on frontline battles, drone strikes, or defending against Russian offensives. But instead, Ukraine executed a bold and highly coordinated operation aimed directly at a strategic artery Russia has relied on for years. This move took Russia by surprise, undercutting its military logistics and dealing a heavy blow to its confidence. The scale of the operation, the precision, and the long-term planning behind it all point to a shift in Ukrainian strategy. Rather than trying to overpower Russian forces head-on, Ukraine is increasingly targeting the very systems that allow Russia to fight. The lifeline in question is the connection between Russia and Crimea. The peninsular Russia annexed in 2014. Crimea's attachment to Russia is not just territorial. It relies on Russia for supplies, reinforcements, fuel, ammunition, and political control. That connection has always depended on a handful of key routes. Ukraine understood that as long as Russia could freely feed its presence in Crimea, its grip on the peninsula would continue. But by severing or weakening these links, Ukraine could dramatically change the battlefield. The most significant route has been the Kerch Bridge, also known as the Crimean Bridge. This structure has been central to Russia's military logistics, civilian transportation, political symbolism, and control narrative. By damaging it, Ukraine isn't just hitting a bridge. It's hitting Russia's claim, its capabilities, and its long-term strategy. This latest attack demonstrated a new level of Ukrainian innovation. It showed preparation, patience, precision, and a deeper understanding of where Russia is most vulnerable. It also signaled to Russia that Ukraine can reach far beyond the front lines. Ukraine's message was clear: nowhere is completely safe, and nothing is untouchable. The method Ukraine used for this operation was particularly impressive. Rather than relying on traditional explosives delivered by drones or surface attacks, they turned to underwater tactics. This signals an evolution in Ukraine's special operations capabilities. Underwater operations require advanced equipment, divers, intelligence, understanding of bridge architecture, and detailed planning. Such strikes take time. They involve reconnaissance, coordination, and risk taking on a level rarely seen in modern conflict zones. By deploying explosives underwater near structural pillars, Ukraine managed to damage the supports that keep the bridge stable. This kind of hit is more difficult to repair and even more difficult to defend against in the future. It forces Russia to commit enormous resources to inspection, reinforcement, and surveillance. For Russia, this attack was not just a military setback, it was a psychological one. The Kerch Bridge has been one of Russia's prized accomplishments, celebrated by state media, visited by officials, and used as a symbol of permanent control over Crimea. And under undermines that symbol and IMMENSE Chespris pray at Pesher, or as the RUSSI a narrative of cessation DOMINANCE. It tells the world that Ukraine is not only resisting, but striking at the heart of Russian infrastructure. This operation also affects Russia's logistics. Crimea has always depended on Russia for fuel, ammunition, and supplies. When the bridge is disrupted, those supplies become delayed, expensive, or inconsistent. This affects troops on the front lines, civilian morale in Crimea, and the efficiency of Russian military operations across the southern front. Just one well-placed strike can ripple through an entire system. The implications of this operation extend well beyond the bridge. Crimea is geographically vulnerable. With the loss of one major supply line, Russia is forced to rely more heavily on other routes through occupied territory. These routes are already under pressure from Ukrainian drone strikes, sabotage efforts, and artillery. By damaging the bridge, Ukraine increases that pressure dramatically. Every alternative route is longer, riskier, and easier to intercept. Another factor in this situation is water. Crimea has long struggled with water shortages. Before 2022, Ukraine had shut off the canal that supplied most of Crimea's water. After Russia occupied parts of southern Ukraine, it restored the flow. But the region remains vulnerable. Any disruption in infrastructure, any decrease in supplies, and any strain on Russia's logistical system puts water distribution at risk. This creates an additional layer of pressure on Russian forces and civilians in Crimea. Ukraine's move also demonstrates the value of asymmetrical warfare. Rather than relying solely on large-scale offensives or costly battles, Ukraine is using smaller, strategic actions to create big effects. Damaging a bridge may not capture territory, but it changes the calculus of the war. It forces Russia to stretch itself thinner and deals invisible but cumulative damage. This moment also shows how Ukraine is adapting. In the early stages of the war, Ukraine relied heavily on Western support, morale, and defensive tactics. Now, Ukraine is showing it can coordinate advanced operations, exploit Russian weaknesses, and create its own turning points. It no longer waits for Russia to make mistakes. It creates opportunities. Russia's reaction to the strike was predictable. Official statements downplayed the damage. They reassured the public that everything was under control. But the rapid suspension of traffic told another story. Whenever Russia tries to minimize an attack publicly, it's often a sign that it is struggling privately. And in this case, the very fact that the bridge was vulnerable at all raises serious questions about Russia's ability to protect key infrastructure. The political implications are also significant. Inside Russia, cracks are appearing in the narrative of control. The Kremlin wants to portray the war as distant, manageable, and necessary, but each strike on the Kerch Bridge brings the conflict home. It reminds civilians that the war is not going according to plan. It sows doubt, embarrassment, and fear. In Crimea itself, the reaction was reportedly tense. Civilians worry about supplies, water, fuel, and security. Some wonder how long Russia can hold the peninsula if Ukraine keeps hitting key routes. Ukraine's strategy is not just military, it's psychological. By targeting symbols and lifelines, Ukraine encourages the idea that Crimea may eventually become untenable for Russia. Beyond the region, the international community also watches closely. Allies of Ukraine see this as proof that their support is making a difference. They see that Ukraine is capable, resourceful, and determined. On the other hand, Russia's allies find it harder to argue that Moscow is winning decisively. Every successful strike weakens Russia's diplomatic posture. The timing of the attack also matters. Ukraine has been under pressure to demonstrate progress. Discussions about aid, support, and cooperation have increasingly hinged on what Ukraine can achieve. This strike gives you Ukraine leverage in diplomatic conversations. It helps Ukraine argue that investment in its military capabilities pays off. Now, let's talk about how this moment could shape the future of the war. First, Russia will almost certainly increase its efforts to protect the bridge. This means more drones, more surveillance, more patrols, and more resources that cannot be used elsewhere. Ukraine has forced Russia to stretch its defenses. Second, Ukraine may continue targeting infrastructure. Bridges, railways, supply depots, and transport hubs are all vulnerable. By repeatedly applying pressure in these areas, Ukraine can weaken Russia's ability to sustain its military operations. Third, Russia may try to retaliate. Attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure may increase. Missile strikes could intensify. But Ukraine has shown time and again that resilience is one of its strongest assets. Fourth, Crimea may become a growing point of tension. If supplies become less reliable, if morale drops, and if Ukraine continues applying pressure, the peninsula could become one of Russia's biggest vulnerabilities rather than its strongest symbol. Fifth, the international community may reassess the situation. Some nations may increase support, seeing Ukraine's effectiveness. Others may call for diplomatic solutions. Either way, this strike reshapes the conversation. This operation also highlights the importance of expertise, intelligence, and innovation. Underwater explosives aren't simple tools. They require specialized training, precision timing, and expert planning. Ukraine is demonstrating that its special operations forces have grown significantly since the war began. They have become more capable and more daring. Another aspect worth discussing is how this affects Russian morale among troops. Soldiers stationed in Crimea or dependent on supplies routed through the bridge may begin feeling cut off. Delays in supplies can lead to frustration. That frustration can lead to mistakes, decline in morale, and decreased combat effectiveness. Wars are not only won through battles. They are won through controlling the conditions under which battles occur. In contrast, Ukrainian morale likely received a substantial boost from this operation. Successful strikes on symbolic targets help reaffirm the belief that Ukraine can win. They remind the world that Ukraine is not just defending, it's pushing forward. This event also highlights the importance of patience in military planning. Ukraine reportedly spent months preparing this operation. Such dedication shows discipline and long-term vision. It also shows that Ukraine is willing to take calculated risks to achieve strategic outcomes. The complexity of the strike also sends a message to Russia's military leadership. It tells them that their assumptions about Ukrainian capabilities may be outdated. It forces them to reconsider their defense strategies. When an adversary shows they can disrupt your strongest points, you are compelled to rethink everything else. Looking forward, this turning point suggests that future phases of the war may involve more strategic strikes rather than large ground offensives. Ukraine may continue focusing on infrastructure, supply lines, logistical hubs, and communication networks. These areas may become even more contested. Additionally, Russia's inability to fully protect such a key asset raises questions about the stability of its control over other areas. If a heavily guarded bridge can be hit, what about railways deep inside occupied territory? What about ports? What about power stations? The list of vulnerable assets grows longer as Ukraine grows more capable. This psychological component is also critical. Wars are fought not only with weapons but with perceptions. Damaging a major bridge creates uncertainty among Russian civilians and soldiers. It creates confidence among Ukrainians. And it sends a message to the world that Ukraine remains proactive. Crimea's future becomes more uncertain after this event. If Ukraine continues to weaken Russia's hold, conditions could shift dramatically over time. The peninsula could become increasingly isolated. Civilians might feel pressure. Russia might face difficult decisions. This moment also reveals how fragile Russia's logistical networks are. A single point of failure, like the Kerch Bridge, can disrupt entire chains of supply. Modern warfare depends heavily on supply lines, and Ukraine is showing it understands how to exploit that weakness. There is also the symbolic symbolism of targeting infrastructure that Russia considers permanent. The attack challenges the narrative that Russia's annexation is irreversible. It shows that nothing built on occupation is guaranteed. When we consider the political impact within Russia, we can imagine increased tension between officials, military leaders, and propagandists. Each side may blame the other for failing to protect the bridge. History shows that high-profile failures often lead to internal conflict. For Ukraine, this operation reinforces its argument for additional support from allies. It demonstrates that when Ukraine receives advanced equipment, intelligence, and resources, it uses them effectively. This can encourage more aid, more collaboration, and more international confidence. As we move further into this discussion, it becomes clear that the strike on Russia's lifeline to Crimea is not an isolated event. It is part of a broader strategy. Ukraine is rebalancing the scales by attacking the systems that allow Russia to dominate. It's not just about eliminating weapons or soldiers. It's about disrupting the environment that supports them. Looking at the bigger picture, the strike symbolizes resilience. Ukraine continues to fight despite overwhelming odds. It continues to adapt, innovate, and resist. Actions like this reflect a nation that refuses to surrender, refuses to be intimidated, and refuses to let its destiny be decided by force. And that brings us to the significance of this being a turning point. Turning points don't always happen on the battlefield. Sometimes they happen in moments that shift the balance of power, alter strategies, and change perceptions. Ukraine severing Russia's lifeline to Crimea is one of those moments. It doesn't end the war, but it changes its shape. In the coming months, we will likely see Russia try to compensate for this loss. We will see Ukraine push further. We will see increased focus on logistics, supply chains, infrastructure, and morale. We may see new technologies, new tactics, and new vulnerabilities emerge. This operation also encourages a new understanding of what victory looks like. For Ukraine, victory isn't just reclaiming land. It's dismantling the systems of occupation. For Russia, losing infrastructure is a reminder that control is not guaranteed. This is a war of willpower, strategy, and endurance. As we draw near the end of this script, it's important to recognize the bravery involved in such operations. Underwater missions involve extraordinary risk. The individuals who carried this out did so knowing the dangers. Their courage reflects the larger spirit of a nation fighting for survival. Finally, this moment should be understood as part of a long struggle. Wars evolve, strategies shift, alliances strengthen or weaken. But when a nation shows determination and uses creativity to offset the advantages of a larger opponent, it creates opportunities for change. Ukraine's strike on Russia's lifeline to Crimea is more than just an attack on infrastructure. It's a declaration that the war is entering a new phase, one where strategic pressure becomes as powerful as direct conflict, where symbolic blows matter as much as territorial ones, and where the balance of power begins to shift, one bold move at a time. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more updates and deeper analysis as events continue to unfold.